Story 1. The Pizza Delivery Trap. I still remember the first time I felt my stomach drop and my pulse spike all at once. Like the world had shifted slightly, and I was standing somewhere I shouldn't be. It was a Thursday evening, the kind where the sun sets too fast and the air smells of wet asphalt and fried dough. I was 17, working part-time at Sal's Pizza, the small-town place that had been around longer than I had been alive. That night, we were slammed with orders, the kind that make your legs ache before the shift even ends. I was assigned a delivery to the edge of town, a place I'd never been. The instructions were simple but strange. Back door only. Leave on step. Knock once. Ring bell if you must. Don't go around front. I shrugged it off. Weird requests weren't unusual. Some people were just particular. The address was on a quiet street where the houses were older, clapboard and brick, each with overgrown yards and sagging porches. When I pulled up, I noticed the house right away. It was bigger than the others, but oddly wrong. The windows were dark, heavy curtains drawn tight. Paint was peeling from the siding, and a single bare bulb flickered weakly above the back door, the only entrance I was supposed to use. I grabbed the pizza bag and stepped into the damp air. The wind carried the faint smell of rot, maybe leaves, maybe something else. I stuck to the cracked sidewalk, trying not to think too hard, telling myself the house was just old and neglected. I reached the back door and noticed the lock looked rusty. The instructions replayed in my head. Knock once. Ring bell if you must. So I knocked, just once. The sound echoed unnaturally, swallowed almost immediately by silence. And then I saw it, a twitch in the curtain, quick, deliberate, like someone was peeking at me without showing their face. My stomach flipped. I waited, frozen. The twitch repeated, faster this time. Then came the faintest creak from inside the house, like floorboards groaning under a careful step. I told myself it was probably an old house settling, but every instinct in me screamed otherwise. I took a step back, ready to call it in as a canceled order, when a sudden movement in my peripheral vision froze me entirely. Blue and red lights bounced off the house. Then the sound, the sharp crackle of radios and boots hitting the pavement. I whipped around and saw them. Uniformed officers, guns drawn, moving in from the sides and front. One shouted, "Everyone out! Step away from the house!" I staggered backward, clutching the pizza bag as if it could somehow shield me. My heart was pounding so hard I thought it might burst through my chest. The officer's eyes were sharp, alert, and I realized immediately I had almost walked straight into a trap. "Delivery boy! Are you alone?" one of the officers yelled. "Yes! I just came with a pizza." My voice sounded absurdly high even to me. A man in plain clothes approached, holding a notepad. He looked at me, then at the bag of pizza, then back at me again. "You did the right thing calling it in," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "We've been monitoring this house for weeks. We had a stakeout tonight. Someone inside lures delivery people in, traps them. We didn't want anyone hurt." I felt the heat drain from my face. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold the bag. I almost went in?" I croaked. The officer nodded. "Yeah, you would have been bait. That's why we surrounded the place. They were watching for someone exactly like you. Someone who followed instructions and didn't get suspicious right away." I stepped back, and my legs nearly gave out. My eyes stayed glued to the twitching curtain at the back door. Even with the police presence, the small movement from inside seemed almost casual, like whoever it was still watching, still waiting. I couldn't tell if I wanted to run or just collapse right there. The officers moved quickly, entering the house with precise, quiet coordination. I stayed back, frozen, feeling every heartbeat echo in the silence of that street. I could hear muffled voices from inside, indistinct but tense. And then, just like that, it was over. They emerged moments later, empty-handed, shaking their heads, muttering about surveillance and suspects who had slipped away. I couldn't process it at first. The house was still there, dark and quiet, as if nothing had happened. The only sign of life was that curtain twitching once more, slow, deliberate, almost teasing. My stomach dropped again. My knees gave out, and I sank onto the curb. I felt exposed, naked in the night, and more aware than I ever wanted to be of how close I had come to disappearing without a trace. The officers came over, checking to make sure I was okay. I nodded dumbly, still staring at the flickering light above the back door. You do this for fun?" I asked one of them shakily, gesturing toward the house. "Not fun," the officer said, shaking his head. "These people are careful. They're smart. They've studied patterns, watched the habits of the town. They use ordinary things, deliveries, mail, service calls to draw in people. It's predatory." I swallowed, tasting bile in my throat. I looked down at the pizza bag. Somehow it felt heavier than it had when I picked it up. That bag, that night, could have been the last thing I ever carried. The officers finally left, leaving me with my manager on the phone, trying to reassure him I was fine, though I barely heard a word he said. I didn't even want the pizza anymore. I couldn't imagine bringing it anywhere, not after what had almost happened. I walked back to my car slowly, the street silent except for the distant hum of traffic. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of wet leaves and that faint, rotten undertone again. My chest ached, my hands were still trembling, and I couldn't stop glancing over my shoulder at the house. It seemed alive, watching, waiting. I drove back to the pizza place in a daze, still gripping the steering wheel like it could anchor me to reality. When I got there, my manager was pacing, worried. "Chris, you okay?" "I'm fine," I said, but I wasn't. My stomach was still twisted, and every shadow outside the diner windows seemed to twitch at the corners of my vision. I never went back to that street, not even when the job demanded it. I made sure someone else got deliveries out that way. But even weeks later, I couldn't shake the feeling that house was still alive with unseen eyes. That the twitching curtain wasn't just a nervous motion. It was deliberate, observing, waiting for the next person who thought following instructions would keep them safe. The story doesn't end there, though. Even now, months later, I'll drive past that part of town, and my chest tightens. The air feels heavier near that street, and sometimes, just for a second, I swear I see a twitch at a window. Just one, deliberate, waiting for someone to make the same mistake I almost did. I learned that night how easily ordinary actions can turn into traps. How instructions, seemingly harmless, can mask intent. How a house can feel alive, even when it's just walls and shadows. And most of all, I learned that being careful isn't always enough. Sometimes luck, timing, and sheer chance are what separate you from disappearing entirely. Every pizza I deliver now, every unfamiliar street I drive down, I think of that house. I think of the twitching curtain, the back door, the strange, quiet air that smelled of rot and rain. And I remember how close I came to being just another story someone would tell, the one that begins with, "He never came home that night." I never saw the person inside the house. They were gone by the time the cops swept through. But the image of that curtain, flickering like a heartbeat, stays with me. Even in bright sunlight, even in familiar streets, I can feel it. The weight of those eyes, the unspoken warning that some doors, no matter how politely you knock, should never be opened. I still deliver pizzas. I still work at Sal's, but I've changed. I watch, I listen, I hesitate. And every time I hear a knock at my own door, I think back to that night, and my stomach turns, just a little, because I know what it feels like to almost be bait. Almost be gone, almost nothing. And sometimes, late at night when the world is quiet and empty, I imagine that curtain twitching again. Just one time, just once, and I shiver, because I know there's someone, somewhere, still waiting for the next person who trusts instructions too much. Story 2. The Man in the Walls. I still remember the first time I heard it. A faint scratching, almost like fingernails against drywall, coming from inside the walls of our new beach house. At the time, I told myself it was the wind, or maybe a stray animal. But deep down, I felt a chill that didn't belong to the ocean breeze. We had inherited the house in Delaware from my late uncle, a quiet man who lived alone and passed without much fanfare. My wife, 2 kids, and I had moved in last summer, excited for the space and the salty air, but something about the old place felt off. The floors creaked, even when no one was walking on them, and at night, the shadows from the driftwood-patterned walls seemed to crawl along the ceiling. I brushed it off as the house settling, old wood expanding and contracting, nothing more. Our son Danny was the first to mention it. He was 9, sharp and sensitive to changes most adults overlook. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon and the waves slapped lazily against the shore, he tugged at my sleeve. "Dad, I think someone's in the walls," he whispered, eyes wide. I can hear them scratching. I knelt down, ruffling his hair, forcing a laugh. "Scratching? Maybe it's a mouse. This house is old, buddy. Nothing to worry about." But that night, as I lay awake with my wife beside me, I thought I heard it too. At first, a soft scuttling, almost like the breeze catching loose siding. Then, beneath it, a slow, deliberate rhythm. My heart skipped. The sound seemed to come from directly behind the wall near Danny's room. I pressed my ear against the drywall, and for the first time, I wasn't hearing scratches anymore. I was hearing something else, breathing. Low, wet, deliberate breaths that didn't belong to any pet or intruder I'd ever known. I pulled away and sat up, shaking my head. "It's nothing," I muttered, though my throat had gone dry. I didn't sleep that night. The next few days, the sounds worsened. Danny would sit quietly in the living room, mid-conversation, and freeze, staring at a wall corner. "He's there," he'd say. "I can hear him." My wife suggested we call an exterminator, but no one found anything. Nothing at all. One evening, I decided to investigate for myself. I waited until my wife and the kids were asleep, then grabbed a flashlight and a screwdriver, crouching near the crawl space door in the corner of the house. The air smelled damp and old, musty with a hint of salt. I knelt, unscrewing the panel slowly. The moment the door swung open, the darkness inside seemed to inhale me, thick and heavy. I shone the flashlight around, seeing only dirt, old wooden beams and cobwebs. But then, I heard it again, breathing, not soft this time, shallow, wet, deliberate, as if someone had been lying in wait. My hand shook on the flashlight. "Hello?" I whispered, my voice barely audible. The response was a guttural scream, muffled but piercing, echoing from inside the crawl space like it had been trapped for months. I froze, heart hammering. The light from my flashlight caught movement, a shadow impossibly close, lunging at me. Filthy hands grabbed my shoulders, pulling me down into the darkness. The smell hit me first, sweat, rot, something unidentifiably foul. The man was thin, ragged, covered in grime and torn clothing. His eyes were wide, wild, unblinking, and filled with something I can't describe without trembling. I tried to fight him off, scrambling backward as he hissed and clawed. My shouts finally woke my wife, who screamed for me to call the police. Danny was crying in his room, banging on the wall, yelling, "Get out of our house!" The man froze, almost as if he realized help was on the way. By the time the police arrived, he had vanished back into the crawl space, slipping like a shadow beneath the floorboards. Officers searched the house and managed to apprehend him just as he tried to escape through a ventilation shaft. I sat on the porch, shivering, listening to the tide crash in the darkness, trying to process what had happened. The officers were professional but visibly disturbed. The detectives later explained what we had lived through. The man had been living in our crawl space for months. They weren't sure how he got in or how he survived, though they suspected he had scavenged food from old cupboards and possibly from local dumpsters. His presence had been so silent, so patient that we never noticed until that night. Danny wouldn't sleep in his room for weeks, and neither would I. Every creak in the house, every draft or shadow became a potential threat. My wife tried to rationalize it, but I saw the same fear reflected in her eyes. An understanding that something unspeakable had existed in our home, unseen but always present. The detectives also revealed something that chilled me even further. The man had been watching us for months, listening, learning our routines. He hadn't attacked sooner because he didn't feel threatened, but he had been patient, calculating, like a predator assessing its prey. I realized then that our home had never really been ours. It had been a trap we'd walked into, unaware of the invisible tenant beneath our feet. Even after the arrest, I couldn't shake the sensation that he hadn't truly left. Sometimes late at night, I hear a faint scratching behind a wall, or the low rasp of breathing that seems just beyond the floorboards. Danny clutches his blanket tighter, and I do the same. We try to remind ourselves it's over, but every house has its secrets, and ours had been living with us all along. I still check the crawl space regularly, flashlight in hand, listening to the silence that isn't quite silent. And sometimes, in the deepest hours of the night, I swear I can hear him whispering, just a faint, wet rasp of a voice that doesn't belong to any man I know. The police said it was a miracle we weren't seriously hurt. But in truth, I don't feel lucky. I feel watched. I feel the remnants of something that shouldn't exist in the corners of our home, lurking behind the walls, patient and waiting for the moment we let our guard down. And sometimes, when the wind rattles the siding just right, I swear I hear scratching again. Just a faint, deliberate rhythm, like fingernails scraping along drywall. I never look at our walls the same way anymore. Story 3. The Summer Stargazing Disappearance. I remember thinking the stars looked different that night. Too bright, too sharp, like they were watching me. I shouldn't have laughed when Taylor dared me to follow the shooting one. It was the end of July, the kind of summer night where the air hangs heavy with the smell of cut grass and the horizon blurs into warm, dark indigo. Taylor and I had grabbed our bikes, stuffed a bottle of cheap white wine into my backpack, and pedaled down the empty country roads that wove between the fields. Crickets buzzed around us, their sound sharp in the quiet, and the occasional hoot of an owl echoed from the distant woods. We found a small clearing beside an abandoned barn, the wood long rotted, paint peeling like flaking skin. The ground was cool under our bare feet as we sprawled on the grass, laying our heads on folded jackets. I could feel Taylor's laughter vibrating through the air as she traced imaginary constellations, her voice light, teasing. "Bet you can't spot one before I do," she said, tilting her head back to the sky. Her hair fanned out like a halo over the dark grass, silver in the moonlight. I was too busy watching the stars. They were pinpricks of frozen fire, suspended above a quiet world, and for a moment, it felt like everything else had melted away. Then, a streak of light cut across the sky, and we gasped in unison, reaching for the other's hand in disbelief. We laughed again, and I swear for a moment the world seemed to hold its breath with us. I remember falling asleep under the stars, or maybe I passed out. I can't tell exactly. The next thing I knew, I woke up with my chest tight, lungs burning as if I'd been running, and the weight of the night pressing down on me. I checked my watch. 3 o'clock. Taylor was gone. I sat up, my heart hammering. The clearing was empty except for our bikes, leaning haphazardly against the barn. My stomach dropped, cold fingers clutching at it. The wind stirred the grass around me, whispering in a way that made my ears ring. I called her name and my voice sounded foreign, thin, swallowed by the darkness. Nothing. I stumbled through the field, the tall wheat scraping against my arms, my mind racing. I couldn't explain why I didn't panic outright. Maybe shock or disbelief had frozen me in place. Eventually, I found her bike, toppled in the dirt, tires still spinning slightly as if someone had left in a rush. "Taylor," my voice cracked. "Please." Hours must have passed. I remember crouching behind the barn, chest pressed to cold wood, every sound amplified. The rustle of leaves, the distant howl of some unseen animal, the pulse of my own terrified heartbeat. Then she appeared. Taylor. She was standing in the clearing, pale, drenched in sweat despite the cool night, eyes wide. I woke up and you weren't there," I said, my voice barely a whisper. She blinked, and her lips parted like she was tasting words she didn't believe. No, it was you. You disappeared. I woke up and you were gone." The words hit me like ice. I shook my head. "What are you talking about?" "I've been here." I woke up. "No," she insisted, stepping back. "I swear I turned and you weren't there. I ran to the road to the fields. I couldn't find you anywhere. It was like you vanished." I remember the wind picking up then, stronger, cooler, brushing against our skin like icy fingertips. The stars seemed to flicker, dimming and sharpening again. Too sharp, too cold. I wanted to reach for her, to prove I was real, but every time I moved, the world felt off, the distance between us stretching like elastic. We argued, the night swallowing our voices. I swear I saw shadows shift in ways they shouldn't, and the barn seemed to loom closer, pressing down on us. When the sun finally started to edge over the horizon, we found our way back to the road, bikes wobbling under our trembling hands. We never spoke of that night again, at least not clearly. Sometimes we hint at it, skirt around it like a dangerous secret. But the memory lingers, crawling in the back of my mind when I'm alone, when the night is still and the stars are too sharp. And every now and then I wake up at 3 a.m., heart hammering, and I wonder, was I really there? Or did Taylor see me vanish into the darkness like I once thought she had? I'll never know. The stars keep watch either way.